Okay.
This is Mike Cashew. This is the brUTE Shoot, the brUTE Strength Training Podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Drew Canavero, San Francisco Fire athlete, multi-time regional, CrossFit regional athlete, and we are blessed with the presence of Jim McDonald, creator and producer of SuperTraining TV and Mark Bell's podcast. Did I leave anything out?
Nope.
The man behind the scenes.
King of all the surveys.
Yes.
I did request that. So
Awesome. You know any gay powerlifters that are still in the closet? Or you assume this isn't going on?
As soon as I compete, there's one.
There you go.
You know, I don't. I don't know how I would know that. That's a really good question. However, I did have an enlightening moment over the weekend where a particular bodybuilder that all of us have always assumed was gay. I was told the story about this particular gentleman stalking some female person's Instagram, and that had me thinking, like maybe we're all wrong, or maybe we just got a really open sensibility.
Yeah. Damn, what that name?
I'll tell you off the air.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, we can't be putting everyone on blast.
Sure.
Yeah, I try not
Definitely.
to try not to do that.
Unless it's silent mic, because
No,
Not Mike.
No. He just has the same.
He's open-minded though.
He's open.
He's
No,
open.
he's really not.
He's not.
Oh yeah. I mean, he's accepting. He's not open-minded.
Yeah.
Accepting of other people's behavior, not open-minded.
Certainly
I'm
not
sure
a
I
bodybuilder.
can find someone to flip mine.
So
Great to be here.
thank you
for
for
being here.
thank you so much, man. And thank you for all of the tips you gave us earlier. It's going to be very helpful.
I like to give at least a tip.
Yes.
Just the tip.
Speaking of which, do you have a hard time keeping them in your pants?
Keeping
Your calves.
My calves in
Yes.
my pants. Oh my!
Yes.
These
Can
old
we
things.
get a shot of these bad boys?
These old things.
And let them air out a little bit. What's your measurement? That looks like 19s?
I think this one's 18 and a half. I think this one's 17. I don't know why the difference.
Little
Doctors
atrophy?
ask me why the difference. I don't know.
Wow.
They think that maybe this side's a little bit looser than that side.
Okay.
The joints on this side maybe a little bit looser.
Speaking of which, if I put a gun to your head and I said I want you to increase the size of my calves 2 inches, exactly what would you do?
I would build a time machine and I would go back in time and I would pick your parents.
Yeah.
He might just have sex with your mother. I mean, that would be the
That
quickest way.
would be totally the quickest way.
I mean,
I didn't think of that. Is she hot?
Was
she
can't
hot?
talk about my mother.
well, it's a matter of
She's a beautiful woman.
It's
She's
a matter of
beautiful
how
woman.
badly do you want large calves, and how far are you willing to go in the service of that.
As a retired athlete, not nearly bad enough.
Comment. You remind me of Danny there from Caffeine and Kilos, we had him on our show, and he was afraid to publicize it for fear that his mom would know that he poops. I think was part of the issue, and he said the occasional bad word. This was months ago. I saw him today, and I said, "What? How did your mom react?" And he said, "She said, Danny, I know those words.
I've heard them. There's another word, meconium.
Yeah,
And so I'm very familiar with your defecation. I mean, that's one of the first things you do when you come out.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
other shoot.
exactly. Yeah, so that's we just went through that with my grandson.
The miracle of birth.
Yeah, he was born not early. He was born about 5 days after the due date, but he had pooped into his amniotic fluid, seriously, and sucked it into his lungs and couldn't breathe when he was born. That was the issue that I was talking about. Yeah, and so he was on a ventilator for 16 days because your lungs don't work right when there's poop on them.
Jesus.
So
And when was this?
December. I'm gonna get this wrong. December 15th.
December 15th.
December 15th.
Wow. Okay. Is that your first child?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
How was that?
That was really weird.
Yeah.
I have not gotten used to that yet. In my mind, I'm not anything like my chronological age. That's a real challenge. Okay, my And I have to remember to myself that people who are younger than I am have grandchildren years before I had this one. So
Right.
Babies having babies.
yeah, exactly. And we didn't. That was certainly not the scenario that we had. But I was young when my first son was born, but not that young.
Right.
23. So
And how many kids you have right now?
2.
Okay.
Sort of 2. I have,
Yes.
I have sort of an additional one.
Right.
My younger son's best friend had kind of a shitty family, and
Okay.
so we consider him part of the family. He's both his mom and dad. Good kid.
A very, very remarkable story. If, Jim associates himself with a lot of really just remarkable people. He is no less of one.
Yeah.
And,
I try to give you the short story.
Absolutely.
When he was in 2nd or 3rd grade, Will, and then my son Sam, in 2nd or 3rd grade, the teacher noticed that he was taking his younger sisters across the street in a red wagon to the grocery store to buy food with food stamps because mom was too strung out to take care of that.
Wow.
Yeah, and the question came up, like, what are we going to do about this? Like does somebody need to call Child Protective Services or what? What needs
And
to
the
go?
teacher's telling you this?
Yeah, the teacher said it to my wife. My wife has always worked in kids' classrooms
Okay.
over the years, and I was like, oh well, something needs to be done, and if he needs a place to go, we can take one kid, and we can take him because the 2 of them are so close. And his grandmother actually stepped up and took him, so we didn't have to take that step, but we had him around a lot, and he was kind of considered part of the family all along. And then his grandmother passed when he was about 17 or 18, and he joined the military. This last August, he was in Afghanistan as an MP, doing personal security detail for some ranking military officers at the Afghan Military Academy. In the incident where the highest ranking officer in the military to be killed in battle since Vietnam was shot by a sniper. Somebody who just lost his nut and had to start firing at people. So he saved the life of a British colonel by actually putting himself between the colonel and the shooter. All of the ranking officers were not wearing body armor because they were in a place that was supposed to be secure. He took 9 rounds. He lost a big hunk of his tibia, and his family is not able to be. The biological family not able to be there for him. So my wife and I spent back and forth about 6 weeks at Walter Reed with him, and then our younger son took over for a couple of months.
Wow.
And he's got somebody else staying with him now. But we walk into the situation, and there's a lot of military brass and politicians and whatever coming through, and suddenly we're mom and dad.
Wow.
And the adjustment of that was perhaps more challenging than a grandchild.
Yeah.
Because you expect to have grandchildren, but you don't expect to have a 25-year-old very recently starting to call you mom and dad, and
Right.
being in that role.
Right.
Being part of the decision making for medical decisions, like how do what's the best course of treatment, or how do we solve this pain problem, or just dealing directly with doctors. It was an experience. It
Right.
was really interesting. Maybe the most interesting part of it is that when other military people know that you've been through that, they treat you differently. They're maybe more willing to take you into their confidence because maybe you understand better because you've been there with that person who
Okay.
is part of your family.
Right.
That the whole thing was really mind-boggling. The last 6, 7, 8 months of my life have been an entirely different thing than I ever thought they would.
Yeah. That's incredible, man.
good start.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
went off
no
in
shit.
a totally different direction there.
We've thus far we've discussed Jim's calves, which looked more at home on a Lincoln Navigator. That would make more sense. We've discussed at least the theoretical possibility of Jim traveling back in time to inseminate at least one of our mothers so that we would have better calves.
So, you have been behind the podcast, behind SuperTraining before it was a gym, and you don't get all of the recognition that Mark necessarily does. What is that experience like? You have to be very, very humble because you play a huge role in the whole production, everything. And how does that? Internally, what's going on?
It's easier than it sounds. It's not really that big a deal because in reality, you need to be able to push somebody forward. And he, when I met Mark, he was a bouncer, and he was, looking to start a gym. And so, very shortly after that, his brother started to make the movie Bigger, Stronger, Faster. Mm-hmm. And so now at this point, hundreds of thousands of people have been exposed to Mark through that movie. So, better than him than me
right.
in that circumstance. And a lot of stuff has been built off of that recognition, Not 100% of that is positive. Bigger, Stronger, Faster was a somewhat controversial movie. And so I'm okay with not having been on the forefront of that particular subject matter. But, I also am in the movie. I shot a little bit of the movie. It all kind of started there. And we started reaching out to YouTube shortly after that movie was picked up by the distributor, figuring that there would be something to be gained by it. We were publicizing the gym, and I was the guy with the camera, and so it made sense for me to be behind the camera. Mark is a more out in front person anyway. The real notoriety at this point comes from him having invented the slingshot. That's not something I could have done. I wasn't even particularly involved in that process other than knowing what was going on.
Right.
And I suggested the font that they used on the logo. That was my biggest involvement in the slingshot. Other than, every once in a while, just stating an opinion, whatever. So
it's a great font, I must say. I would have gone. I suggested Comic Sans. In retrospect, that probably wasn't the best idea.
Yeah.
You don't have to answer this, but what is the font? I know it's proprietary to you.
No, it's not. It's actually the one from Friday the 13th, Part 2.
Really?
Totally, yeah.
Part 2, okay.
Part 2. I don't know why it's Part 2, but it's Part 2. It's not the same as Part 1 or any of the other parts. It's Friday the 13th, Part 2. Yeah, that was 5 minutes. 5 minutes on the internet. He was texting me back and forth about. He's like, this is what I've got at this point, but I want it to look more like a slasher film.
That makes sense. Okay.
Maybe one of the Friday the 13th movies, and I within 5 minutes, literally, I pulled that up and sent it back to him. I said Friday the 13th Part 2. He sent back yes. That was.
Mm-hmm. Have you considered getting Robert Eklund on the show to get his thoughts about that?
That would be interesting. Yeah.
For the audience, that's Freddie. That's Fred. Robert Eklund.
Thank you.
You're well. I'm here just to disseminate helpful tidbits like that. But
and then as far as the rest of it goes, it's changed so much recently. I was alluding to earlier today that when I came up with the idea for the podcast, it was a couple of years before we actually executed it. Mm-hmm. And I would come to him and say, I really think we should do a podcast. And he'd say, I don't know anything about podcasts. I was like, well, I can figure it out.
Right.
All right. So I think we should do it. And he's like, yeah, I don't know. And it wasn't until we had the sort of third person who had a good rapport with Mark, right, and it was pretty quick and funny and whatever, then I knew that it would work. And then he's Silent Mike, is Mark's assistant, and I said, Mike, you have to help me have this happen. And he was, he was looking for, he's a young guy looking for some social media recognition and,
right,
try to somehow become rich off of it like everybody is right now. And I said, you have to help me. And he's like, oh, okay, well, I'll talk to him because I'm totally in.
Right.
And at that point, it sort of, it started to gel a little bit. And then once we got one episode done, not having any idea when we sat down what we were going to talk about.
Right,
I don't
right.
know if you knew what you were going to talk about in your first episode.
Not much.
Other than we talked about how the gym started. That was,
Right.
We knew we were going in that we were going to talk about that, and that we were going to talk about the fact that we were not going to be overly programmed.
Right.
Other than that, we spent an hour or so just rambling,
That's bullshit.
just bullshitting. Yeah,
Love it.
yeah, and it worked because it flowed.
Right.
It was funny. It was.
And it's natural. It's
Yeah.
storytelling, right?
Right.
I mean, again, there's no way we could have scripted that the show would have started how it started.
Right.
I mean, there's no way we could have anticipated that. I liked the story I mentioned to you was that Chrissy's first appearance on the PowerCast, and she's sitting over there, very self-consciously. She doesn't want to disclose. Great. I believe the script for Chrissy's first appearance on the PowerCast was anal ?
Yeah, it was written on the whiteboard, and that's all it said. And Mark went there.
Yeah. Well, he circled back to it.
He circled back to it a number of times.
It
Got back
did.
around
And
to
now
it.
It was an undercurrent, and then
the two of you had not been really.
we had not been dating long, but
Yeah.
the answer was in the affirmative.
So you didn't even have to ask. We did that little task for you. Is what you're saying?
I mean, I think.
Providing you were going to ask.
I
the
think the
question.
glimmer in her eye was enough was the answer.
Yeah.
But again, I think for the PowerCast audience, it was helpful to know that
Yeah.
yes, that not a question mark. It was a period. It was a declarative statement.
It was declarative.
Anal.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, the second time that we had her on the show, we went in an entirely different direction. It's it's funny, but a pretty serious show as well.
I heard about it.
You know?
Have y'all released it yet?
Yeah.
Okay.
It
I need
came
to
out
watch that.
January.
Okay.
Yeah, and we never know. We never know
Sure.
where it's going to go. We recently had Mike Rashid, who's kind of a YouTube personality on. I had no idea this guy was so intellectual.
Right.
It's not what he looks like. It's not what he sounds like on his videos. And he starts to talk about, being a huge fan of Neil deGrasse Tyson and things he liked to read and things he was inspired by, literature, this, that, movies. Okay.
Right.
Extremely well spoken, and that's not what,
Right. I think it was me and Drew were talking about last night. There's thousands of people with huge social media followings nowadays,
Right.
athletes, and what makes them huge on social media is not always them performing well, but their story and their personality and things like this, things like Facebook, whatever it may be, give people the platform to express that. And it can be pretty cool.
They call it the democratization of fame.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's heavy.
That was heavy. That was real heavy. To go back to sort of an earlier point, this last weekend, obviously we're at the Arnold,
Mhm.
and this is the first time that, actually it's maybe the second time because counting LA Fit Expo, that I had people come up to me and say, your podcast and your videos, they mean so much to me. They help me get through bad days. They help me get through my work day. It's, they're funny, they're whatever. And then thank you for what you do, because I know you're behind the scenes.
That is
more,
awesome.
And like, how come you don't talk more? Well, the other two guys never shut the fuck up. So that's pretty much why.
Silent Mike is not what we would call.
He is not silent.
He's the loquacious.
Yeah. Well, but the thing is that the flow is more important than what I say, and how often I'm, often you hear what my opinions or whatever on the show.
Right.
And sometimes I don't have them. I don't have. They are much more opinionated about certain things than I am, and it just flows. It just somebody has to play.
Right. It's a team, right? Everybody's got
It's
a
a team.
role.
It's a team.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You don't necessarily discuss them ahead of time, but it comes together. Also, circling back to the beginning of SuperTraining, when I met Mark, he really wanted to have his own thing, and we had been traveling over an hour one way to a powerlifting gym that Jesse Burdick had invited both of us to. Crossfitters, Jesse Burdick is.
Yep.
He's locking down Katie Hogan.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this is
smart
correct.
man.
This is correct.
Well
yeah,
done,
yeah,
Jesse.
Really, really smart. There's a story behind that too. We can come back to that in a minute. But he at some point said, this drive, number one, is killing me. Number two, I really want to have my own thing. Even if it starts out as just a key lock gym or we're in somebody's garage and we contribute equipment and whatever. Are you in? And I said, yeah, of course. He's the first person to ever text me, and in the first month I needed to buy a plan because the charges were through the roof because I had no accounting in my budget for that. Right.
The second text was a photo of his penis.
Yeah, this is correct. And he ended up talking the owners of a commercial gym that was opening in Woodland into building out a powerlifting room in the back of the gym and buying a bunch of equipment. They had really poor financial management. They had hired him to be a trainer, and somewhere along the line they'd stopped paying him. And he's like, well, if you're not going to pay me, I need you to give me a really good discount on this equipment. And they did that, and when he came up with the money to pay it off, at that point that we were beginning to wonder if they were going to be able to stay open, like there was going to be a padlock on the door at some point, and we'd lose access to the equipment. And so we moved out. And that was kind of the beginning of the gym.
Right.
And then we were inside of a non-CrossFit cross-training facility for 6.5 years, and now we have our own place.
Right.
Which is gorgeous.
Yeah, gorgeous. And strangely enough, the gym is free because the Slingshot is such an amazing success.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and we can sort of pick and choose who we have to train with.
Right. So you'll have members that just come for free.
Yes.
And it's all powerlifters, I'm assuming.
It's
predominantly
predominantly
powerlifters.
powerlifters.
And is it all good powerlifters or what?
Mm-mm. No.
Okay.
Some people are just, they were good chemistry, or they didn't follow the chemistry.
Right.
Some of them are very strong. Some of them may be very strong eventually. Some of them might never be very strong.
Right.
But as long as everybody can get along, and if somebody new comes, they want to move into the area, they move themselves into the area, and they're a great powerlifter. Obviously, we're going to invite them to be involved. And as long as they fit in the mix, then they'll be there. But that chemistry where everyone basically gets along, there's no real drama,
Right.
That's critical. And environment is a huge thing in creating any gym.
Absolutely. And it could, that's kind of unique because very few people have that much freedom to dictate who comes to the gym.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
You have to. What am I trying to say? You are bound by people paying you.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
You no longer have a fiduciary responsibility that you have to meet.
Right.
Because you now have the
Because
discretion and the latitude that
Right.
that monetary success from the Slingshot has.
That's exactly what I was going for.
That's why you bring me on here, man.
Fiduciary.
Yes, that's a word. That's a word.
The gym is paid for.
Yeah.
And so
And how long is that set up in?
it started about more than a year and a half ago, and then we moved into this new facility, and we sort of added a few more people and added a lot more equipment.
Right.
It's just amazing setup now. Like almost everything you could ever want.
Boner
Right.
inspiring is probably the best way to describe it.
And we have a studio there for the podcast, and we'll be building that out some more. Mark says that he would like people to be as impressed when they come into the studio as they are when they go to the gym.
Right.
So I'm excited to see how that pans out.
Oh, yeah.
For sure, because that affects me pretty directly. I actually have an office at the gym now, which is not something that's happened before, which makes all this a little bit easier, production-wise.
Right.
I think what I really want to kind of segue on, piggyback off of your comment about creating that environment where the people that train SuperTraining would be vetted in a certain sense, and that vetting process is not tied necessarily to their strength, their limit strength. It's more about bringing the right people together.
Right.
And I remember the first time I met Mark and Jim, Travis Cassidy,
Right.
and Justin from ESAC
Right.
had brought me in. And that was when Ben and Blair in the off season were there. And I had heard of SuperTraining. I knew who Mark was. I was not expecting to be embraced as much as I was. I have to say that what you guys did at SuperTraining was a radical departure. At that point, the powerlifting community had not really embraced the broader CrossFit community. And that's something that if you have any insight, what made SuperTraining, what made you and Mark so different and so willing to, embrace the CrossFit community, which, at that point was still kind of contending with issues of, being kind of the black sheep of the strength and conditioning community.
Well, I would say that one factor was the fact that Jesse Burdick was training out of a CrossFit facility, and we began to become exposed to the CrossFit community. And then for a while, Jesse and Mark were doing CrossFit powerlifting certification or whatever they're calling it. And so they were exposed to a lot of CrossFitters in that way, and I attended some of those seminars that they did and met people and I unlike the powerlifting world is at times, I didn't meet anybody in CrossFit that I didn't think was cool.
Right.
And we knew that it's very common for CrossFitters to go to different gyms and train with different people and open arms and all that kind of stuff. Not that we were ever dicks to people who were just coming into the gym. We were always actually really nice to people when they came in. But I think that maybe that was the point that it became a solid value. That when you bring CrossFitters into your gym, they're not there to do CrossFit. They're there to do strength training.
What you do, right?
Right. They're there to do what you do. They're not going to approach it exactly the same way that your lifters do. But that doesn't mean they won't be impressive.
Right. Or that they won't try harder.
Yeah. That's the thing. That's what the really crazy part of it was, that CrossFitters will fucking kill themselves. Right. I never experienced that before. That just putting that 100% plus effort into something that isn't their sport.
Right.
And how can you not admire that? Whether it's always the smartest thing to do or not,
Right.
It's different.
Right.
But you admire the heart associated with that. I remember going to Rogue a couple of years ago with Mark and seeing Matt Chan do one of the open workouts and just die at the end of it. But just the look on his face, he was completely spent. And whether or not that was a good thing to do, he was all in.
Right.
He was all in. And, Mark really set the tone on that, but several of us have always just kind of been that we need to acknowledge that. When that's going on in our gym, we need to acknowledge that these people are as committed as we are
Right.
to their sport and to getting stronger. And there isn't really, we shouldn't be just drawing distinctions like that. And as newer people have come into the gym, and people who were maybe more old-line powerlifters have retired or left the gym to do other things and moved on, it's just an accepted thing now.
Right.
And we still have at least 3 CrossFit affiliate owners who come in several days a week to train powerlifting with us, with the regular group now, not as a separate group, but with the regular group, because it's difficult for them to train in their own gyms.
Right. Always getting questions and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
right. They're always getting interrupted, and they're not as committed to trying to be games athletes now.
Right.
They're just trying to be strong.
Sure.
And stay on top of their game and be legit, but not necessarily trying to go to games. And strength is, as Mark says, never a weakness. And so
Yep.
they
If you do it right, you can't do it wrong.
You gotta want it though.
You gotta want it though.
And it helps to have an expert an expert eye. Even if you are an expert, it helps to have someone else coach you up,
right. And I think that's one of the important things that CrossFitters know. They go to different gyms to be seen by different eyes.
Yep.
And experience different environments and different, slightly different sets of values.
Yep.
It's
a really cool culture. I guess I come from CrossFit, but I fell into strength and conditioning, and I've seen a lot of coaches on both sides, and I think one thing that CrossFit coaches have is that there's a huge volume of very hungry coaches. They're all very young, or most of them are very young, but they're very hungry to learn more, whether it be weightlifting, powerlifting,
right.
And all the other stuff that's involved in CrossFit endurance and gymnastics and everything. But it's a cool culture in that.
So something I was thinking about as I was walking over here is that if CrossFit is going to survive as a movement, as it has been, it's going to be on the backs of people, all those individuals and their commitment. It's not really going to be because of what HQ does.
Right.
And even if it evolves to not be called CrossFit, it's still going to be that same effort.
I agree.
So in that way, I don't think that there's a giant CrossFit bubble that's going to pop. Even if it's not someday called CrossFit anymore, even if that part goes away, all of these different environments, all these little gyms where people train together and they get that sense of community.
Right.
That's the important part. We're talking about social media and maybe not being the best athlete. That stuff, and all the social media following, that stuff looks to me like a bubble. That looks to me like the .com bubble.
Well, it's valuation without any type of without liquidity or capital. You have people that build reputations that vastly exceed what they're actually capable of. It's kind of smoke and mirrors. It's just a glimpse. It's a highlight reel that's not really indicative of what someone is actually bringing to the table. And I think you're right. I think even if that bubble doesn't necessarily burst dramatically, I think there will always be some new social media platform to replace.
Right.
One of those is there was a Facebook to replace MySpace, and there's always been new variations and derivations of that. What I think there is going to be some type of correction where I think people are going to have to remember that it's not what you can portray or convince others. It's what are you actually capable of delivering, and that's the slow, organic method, but it's one that lasts.
Other than this self-satisfaction of having, looking at a long list of followers, these folks are looking for money,
right? From
sponsors, from advertisers, or whatever. If that starts to not pay off at some point, if the sponsors, advertisers are not forking out for that stuff anymore because it doesn't really help their brands. I mean, right now it's working, but I don't think it'll continue working forever.
I mean, let's look. Tila Tequila. Does anyone remember her?
Yeah. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
She was MySpace royalty.
Right.
And did she have a TV show?
I think so. It was basically her whoring herself out, literally and figuratively.
I thought she was a cartoon. I thought she was a cartoon.
She was a cartoon.
She was a caricature. She was a caricature of a real person.
Okay.
But she was flesh and blood, and she was able to parlay her internet celebrity into a very short-lived actual celebrity. And I think that what we have now is just that has been magnified several thousand times over as the technology, as the means to share information has become more ubiquitous and a lot easier. But it really is just ambient noise.
Mm-hmm.
I think we still see that even though there has been a democratization of information, it just the ease of setting up a podcast, the ease of starting an Instagram account makes it so that the market is flooded. But what we still see is quality rises to the top, premium rises to the top. It may take a little bit longer, but there's really no shortcuts to success. Everything that Jim's been talking about, from the humble beginnings of SuperTraining, it hasn't been direct path.
Right.
It wasn't that someone had a really had a great idea, great plan, and they executed perfectly. And we're here. It's always success is usually a very messy process.
It's trial and error, and making sure that the trials are as low cost as possible, so that you're not dying when it's an error.
Right. Yeah, I before we started brUTE Strength, I didn't have an Instagram, I didn't have a Twitter, I had a Facebook that I rarely used.
How did you get laid?
I didn't. I went through the exploratory period that we were talking about earlier.
Oh,
and,
yes. You need to circle back to that.
And I did a mastermind group with the barbell shrug guys, and they said, well, that's fine. I said, I'm not going to get an Instagram. I hate it. It disconnects me from people, all this kind of stuff. And they said, well, that's fine if you don't want to make any money. And that's when I started an Instagram. And they didn't say it exactly like that, but it's basically like you're going to be overrun by all of these types of people with they're not necessarily capable of delivering, but they're able to convince people they are. And,
Right.
That's where started up the Instagram machine.
Yeah,
it's a tool. It's a useful one.
Right. I hate it. Instagram itself is such a piece of shit. We have a guy that gives us advice.
I hope eventually this makes its way to the Instagram people. We won't retreat from those comments.
Yeah, exactly. He's a social media expert who provides opinions to us. He's not exactly a consultant, but he provides opinions and insight. And I argue with him all the time. In fact, I pick fights with him on text occasionally, just because I think that Instagram is a gigantic piece of shit. And if Facebook owns it, but it is the least user-friendly thing ever to be totally mobile. No, you can't use Instagram on a computer in any meaningful way.
Right.
You can't put links into description and comments.
Yeah,
You can't put links in comments, even if you're the owner of the account.
Do you know why that is, by chance?
Because they suck. I don't know. I really don't know. I think it.
Think about it.
I've been told that it's on purpose. That they're trying to keep it purely mobile, and they're trying to. If it were on a computer, it would be easier to dominate. And if that level of domination came forward, it would probably hasten the end of Instagram, because it would all be commercial messages instead of more personal messages.
Right.
And I get that, but damn it, I hate using it. I really hate. I'm thinking about just hiring somebody to run it for me. I've got a personal one that's got not much on it, and then I have one for the podcast that I literally forget it exists.
Right.
Other than 2 or 3 days a week, I completely
Takes a lot
forget
of work,
it exists. Yeah. And having to go back and forth between accounts. At least Twitter, which is also a piece of shit.
Oh, God.
At least you can. Twitter itself put out an app that you can switch between accounts.
Right.
Instagram, you have to log all the
night.
way out and log all the way back in. And heaven forbid that you should type, that you should fat finger on your phone the password. Oh my God, it's so frustrating. And typing in all those long descriptions on things and all the freaking hashtags and getting
It's exhausting.
Yeah, oh my God. And then there's this whole deal where when you roll one of those puppies out, a few days later, after it gets the response it's supposed to get, you're supposed to go back in and edit that stuff out. So anybody that's looking at you to sponsor you thinks that you got that stuff organically,
Right.
instead of just whoring out the whole description with at
Right.
tags.
It's funny to see like one sentence of actual content and then a solid paragraph of hashtags.
And that repeat the same
Thing, but slightly different. The same but different.
Yeah, or repeat the same user handles over and again for the tags. When you're tagging people, and it's supposed to be like if you fat finger it, you're going to get one of the right ones, right? What a piece of shit.
Social media knowledge bombs.
We're at the Arnold, which is essentially just an orgy of self-importance.
Comic-Con for fitness.
Well, yeah, we actually saw Sun almost come. I hope they integrate the two at someday, because I was not aware that cosplay and lightsaber fighting were
It's called.
sanctioned, contested.
I heard that. Yeah.
This
I mean, that's
was. I
incredible.
think this was the world championship actually.
I can't believe that I didn't know this beforehand.
I do
Star
know.
Wars guy was looking really happy with Darth
God.
Vader.
I do know that in the military you can choose Jedi as your religion. And then
No.
you can't. I'm gonna tell you.
Well,
That's kind of cool.
Freedom of religion.
It's kind of cool. What
that's
about the spaghetti one? You know what I'm talking
Pastafarian.
about? Pastafarian.
Flying spaghetti monster.
I possibly. I don't know. I think so.
Not sure
If
if
you
that.
request
I
it,
mean, I feel like there'd have to be a franchise behind it,
right?
you know. But at the arm book, it was walking around. I mean, the people watching here is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Walking around, you see individuals and companies that exist only because of what they've managed to convince large sections of the population of who they are.
Mhm.
And it's pretty remarkable. I feel like I make one of those comments where it's like, well, back in my day, I remember 3 or 4 years ago wasn't that long ago. Even YouTube itself is a fairly recent phenomenon, but just
10
to see
years.
how even the last 3 or 4 years, how the dynamic of even interpersonal interaction, even the dynamic of like you said, it used to be that to get a sponsorship
Yeah.
as an athlete, you had to prove something on
Right.
the field or at a meet. You had to actually do something
Right.
that was noteworthy.
Right.
Now it seems that anyone with a sizable enough following is conferred the advantages and privileges of being an actual athlete. And I think what happens is that, the hungry athletes that you mentioned earlier, the people who are really putting the work, but may not be social media savvy or may not be blessed with great calves like Jim does, are kind of being edged out, forced out of it. I think there's that kind of that negative aspect of the democratization of information and making
And they may be edged out of the social media battle, but a lot of them are the ones that are spending extra time training and actually doing the work.
True, but
And it depends what.
to what extent has social media now supplanted actual human interaction? To what now has that become now?
Oh, absolutely.
Is it?
Yeah.
It's regrettable to some extent, but like you said, I think there has to inevitably be some type of market correction.
Well, here's what I hope it is. I hope that we start weeding people out based on authenticity.
There's the key word.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be the best athletes or whatever, but that they are genuinely who they are, and that's what's reflected in their social media, as opposed to what they want people to do.
Are you hoping that happens naturally, or that?
Yeah, I am hoping that it happens naturally. I don't see a big thunderclap happening,
Right.
and it immediately changes. But what I've noticed over the last few years too is that tastes and opinions of things ride waves that you cannot predict. That you would not, I mean, who thought that we were going to be talking about birth control again?
Mhm.
Like the way that we are now. Like it's like access to birth control is an issue.
Right.
I thought that was solved. You know
I
what I
thought
mean?
I thought we were all still pulling out.
You didn't get that in mind?
I mean, things like that. The fact that people are drinking less soda than they have in years. Every year, people drink less soda. Every year, people drink or smoke fewer cigarettes. All those trends that and people, a number of people who believe that we need some dinosaurs at the same time.
Yeah.
that changes.
Is that on the
over-
rise again?
I think it is. Yeah.
No.
I believe it is.
That's
just
very
wait.
unfortunate.
Just
There's
wait.
definitely people who don't believe
wait.
in science.
Just wait until the scientists are able to discern that the stegosaurus had a saddle on, and then you guys are going to be eating crow.
The Flintstones were real.
Yes, and if they were, then I would dibs on Betty.
Betty was a fucking smoke show.
Betty Nugs.
She was a smoke show.
Yeah, she was.
Those legs.
I always thought that woman was a little uptight.
In all the right ways,
Yeah,
all the good places.
No. Maybe more uptight than
So anal would be a non-starter.
I'm Betty.
Yeah, no, I'm saying the other way around. That Wilma would say no anal.
Oh,
Betty would be-
obviously.
yeah.
I wasn't confused the two.
What was like? Okay, so Ginger and Marianne. Which one does anal?
God, that's got to be Ginger.
See, I think it's Marianne.
You think Marianne?
I think it's Marianne.
No, I think
She's
they
in
might
ch-
both.
I think she's not challenged by it. Doesn't challenge her femininity.
Feminine.
Femininity.
It's true.
Femininity.
Sound it out. Sound it out.
I'm really
All right.
tired. That's
We're gonna wrap it up. We're running out of camera room, but when we come back next time, we get you on here. We're gonna pick up with more candidates for anal
and Flintstone sexuality.
Flintstone sexuality,
We have
and what
covered such a
actually
breadth of
happened
topics.
in the war on carbs, and was it a battle lost or a war lost? We'll figure that out. when we
MacArthur
come back.
battled back to the 52nd. There's let's just say there's an armistice. There's a truce.
All right.
An unsteady truce.
We can follow up on that. Yeah.
Thank you for joining us, man.
Oh,
Really
thank you very
thanks
much.
for having me very
Pleasure.
much. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. Well,
Pleasure
I don't
all
know
on
how
this
to
side.
end these things, so I'm gonna just look at back and forth.
You gotta
Yes.
end. You gotta like follow up the like, hey, follow us on after we spent an entire portion
Yeah, you know, social media is
disparaging
always
social
a place.
media. We're
Gotcha.
now going to
You gotta
Exactly.
plug it. You gotta plug it now.
Exactly.
follow us at
Follow us at brUTE at brUTE.strength on Instagram, brUTE_strength on Twitter.
just started.
Just started
Just
it.
started
We have
it.
0
It's
tweets.
fresh.
Very, very fresh.
It's zero regrettable things.
We're gonna make our first tweet right after this.
Excellent.
Where can they follow you, Jim?
I always say this on our show, I'm Jim McD, STTV, everywhere, but I would want you to find me. And our show,
Very lyrical.
Yeah, our show is, our Instagram is at Marco's Podcast.
Awesome.
Excellent. SuperTraining.tv.
Supertraining.tv, where we aggregate the videos from Mark's channel and my channel and other channels that feature us.
Awesome.
And you can I'm Drew C. You can find me at home
Or on the road.
or right behind you. Other than that, you'll never know.
There you go.
So that's my contribution.
Love it. All right, man.
Thank you very much,
All right,
Jim.
thanks.
Pleasure.
Appreciate it.